Chapter 26. The Goblin Miners. That same night, several of the servants were having a chat together before going to bed. "What can that noise be?" said one of the housemaids, who had been listening for a moment or two. "I've heard it the last 2 nights," said the cook. "If there were any about the place, I should have taken it for rats, but my Tom keeps them far enough. I've heard, though," said the scullery maid, "that rats move about in great companies sometimes. There may be an army of them invading us. I've heard the noises yesterday and today too. It'll be great fun then for my Tom and Mrs. Housekeeper's Bob," said the cook. "They'll be friends for once in their lives and fight on the same side. I'll engage Tom and Bob together. We'll put to flight any number of rats." "It seems to me," said the nurse, "that the noises are much too loud for that. I have heard them all day, and my princess has asked me several times what they could be. Sometimes they sound like distant thunder, and sometimes like the noises you hear in the mountain from those horrid miners underneath." "I shouldn't wonder," said the cook, "if it was the miners after all. They may have come on some hole in the mountain through which the noises reach to us. They are always boring and blasting and breaking, you know." As he spoke, there came a great, rolling rumble beneath them, and the house quivered. They all started up in a fright, and rushing to the hall, found the gentlemen-at-arms in consternation also. They had sent to wake their captain, who said from their description that it must have been an earthquake, an occurrence which, although very rare in that country, had taken place almost within the century, and then went to bed again, strange to say, and fell fast asleep without once thinking of Curdie, or associating the noises they had heard with what he had told them. He had not believed Curdie. If he had, he would have at once thought of what he had said, and would have taken precautions. As they heard nothing more, they concluded that Sir Walter was right, and that the danger was over for perhaps another 100 years. The fact, as discovered afterwards, was that the goblins had, in working up a second sloping face of stone, arrived at a huge block which lay under the cellars of the house, within the line of the foundations. It was so round that when they succeeded, after hard work, in dislodging it without blasting, it rolled, thundering down the slope with a bounding, jarring roll, which shook the foundations of the house. The goblins were themselves dismayed at the noise, for they knew, by careful spying and measuring, that they now must be very near, if not under, the king's house, and they feared giving an alarm. They, therefore, remained quiet for a while, and when they began to work again, they no doubt thought themselves very fortunate in coming upon a vein of sand which filled a winding fissure in the rock on which the house was built. By scooping this away, they came out in the king's wine cellar. No sooner did they find where they were than they scurried back again, like rats into their holes, and running at full speed to the Goblin Palace, announced their success to the king and queen with shouts of triumph. In a moment, the Goblin royal family and the whole Goblin people were on their way in hot haste to the king's house, each eager to have a share in the glory of carrying off that same night the Princess Irene. The queen went stumping along in one shoe of stone and one of skin. This could not have been pleasant, and my readers may wonder that, with such skillful workmen about her, she had not yet replaced the shoe carried off by Curdie. As the king, however, had more than one ground of objection to her stone shoes, he no doubt took advantage of the discovery of her toes, and threatened to expose her deformity if she had another made. I presume he insisted on her being content with skin shoes, and allowed her to wear the remaining granite one on the present occasion, only because she was going out to war. They soon arrived in the king's wine cellar, and regardless of its huge vessels, of which they did not know the use, proceeded at once, but as quietly as they could, to force the door that led upwards. Chapter 27. The Goblins in the King's House. When Curdie fell asleep, he began at once to dream. He thought he was ascending the mountainside from the mouth of the mine, whistling and singing, ring, dod, bang, when he came upon a woman and child who had lost their way. And from that point, he went on dreaming everything that had happened to him since he thus met the princess and Luti, how he had watched the goblins, how he had been taken by them, how he had been rescued by the princess. Everything, indeed, until he was wounded, captured, and imprisoned by the men-at-arms. And now he thought he was lying wide awake where they had laid him, when suddenly he heard a great thundering sound. "The cobs are coming," he said. "They didn't believe a word I told them. The cobs will be carrying off the princess from under their stupid noses. But they shan't. That they shan't." He jumped up, as he thought, and began to dress, but, to his dismay, found that he was still lying in bed. "Now then, I will," he said. "Here goes. I am up now." But yet again, he found himself snug in bed. 20 times he tried, and 20 times he failed. For in fact, he was not awake, only dreaming that he was. At length, in an agony of despair, fancying he heard the goblins all over the house, he gave a great cry. Then there came, as he thought, a hand upon the lock of his door. It opened, and, looking up, he saw a lady with white hair, carrying a silver box in her hand, enter the room. She came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelt like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave of her hands, everything vanished. He felt himself sinking into the profoundest slumber, and remembered nothing more until he awoke in earnest. The setting moon was throwing a feeble light through the casement, and the house was full of uproar. There was soft, heavy, multitudinous stamping, a clashing and clanging of weapons, the voices of men and the cries of women, mixed with a hideous bellowing which sounded victorious. The cobs were in the house. He sprang from his bed, hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. Then, spying an old hunting knife or short sword hanging on the wall, he caught it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sounds of strife, which grew louder and louder. When he reached the ground floor, he found the whole place swarming. All of the goblins of the mountain seemed gathered there. He rushed amongst them, shouting, 1, 2, hits and hew. 3, 4, blast and bore. And with every rhyme, he came down a great stamp upon a foot, cutting at the same time their faces, executing, indeed, a sword dance of the wildest description. Away scattered the goblins in every direction, into closets, upstairs, into chimneys, up on rafters, and down to the cellars. Gertie went on stamping and slashing and singing, but saw nothing of the people of the house until he came to the great hall, in which, the moment he entered it, arose a great goblin shout. The last of the men-at-arms, the captain himself, was on the floor, buried beneath a wallowing crowd of goblins. For, while each knight was busy defending himself as well as he could, by stabs in the thick bodies of the goblins, for he had soon found their heads all but invulnerable, the queen had attacked his legs and feet with her horrible granite shoe, and he was soon down. But the captain had got his back to the wall and stood out longer. The goblins would have torn them all to pieces, but the king had given orders to carry them away alive, and over each of them, in 12 groups, was standing a knot of goblins, while as many as could find room were sitting upon the prostrate bodies. Gertie burst in dancing, gyrating, and stamping, and singing like a small, incarnate whirlwind. Where 'tis all a hole, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no souls? But she upon her foot, sir, has a granite shoe, the strongest leather boot, sir, 6 would soon be through. The queen gave a howl of rage and dismay, and before she recovered her presence of mind, Gertie, having begun with the group nearest him, had 11 of the knights on their legs again. Stamp on their feet, he cried, as each man rose, and in a few minutes the hall was nearly empty, the goblins running from it as fast as they could, howling and shrieking and limping, and cowering every now and then as they ran to cuddle their wounded feet in their hard hands, or to protect them from the frightful stamp of the armed men. And now Gertie approached the group which, in trusting in the queen and her shoe, kept their guard over the prostrate captain. The king sat on the captain's head, but the queen stood in front like an infuriated cat, with her perpendicular eyes gleaming green, and her hair standing half up from her horrid head. Her heart was quaking, however, and she kept moving about her skin, shod foot, with nervous apprehension. When Curdie was within a few paces, she rushed at him, made one tremendous stamp at his opposing foot, which happily he withdrew in time, and caught him round the waist to dash him on the marble floor. But just as she caught him, he came down with all the weight of his iron-shod shoe upon her skin-shod foot, and with a hideous howl she dropped him, squatted on the floor, and took her foot in both hands. Meanwhile, the rest rushed on the king and the bodyguard, sent them flying, and lifted the prostrate captain, who was all but pressed to death. It was some moments before he recovered breath and consciousness. "Where's the princess?" cried Curdie, again and again. No one knew, and off they all rushed in search of her. Though every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she to be found. Neither was one of the servants to be seen. But Curdie, who had kept to the lower part of the house, which was now quiet enough, began to hear a confused sound as of a distant hubbub, and set out to find where it came from. The noise grew as his sharp ears guided him to a stair, and so to the wine cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip, with another company, had gone off to search the house. They captured everyone they met, and when they could find no more, they hurried away to carry them safe to the caverns below. But when the butler, who was amongst them, found that their path lay through the wine cellar, he bethought himself of persuading them to taste the wine, and, as he had hoped, they no sooner tasted than they wanted more. The routed goblins, on their way below, joined them, and when Curdie entered, they were all, with outstretched hands, in which there vessels of every description, from saucepan to silver cup, pressing around the butler, who sat at the tap of a huge cask, filling and filling. Curdie cast one glance around the place before commencing his attack, and saw in the farthest corner a terrified group of the domestics unwatched, but cowering, without courage to attempt their escape. Amongst them was the terror-stricken face of Luti, but nowhere could he see the princess. Seized with the horrible conviction that Harelip had already carried her off, he rushed amongst them, unable for wrath to sing any more, but stamping and cutting with greater fury than ever. "Stamp on their feet! Stamp on their feet!" he shouted, and in a moment the goblins were disappearing through the hole in the floor like rats and mice. They could not vanish so fast, however, but that many more goblin feet had to go limping back over the underground ways of the mountain that morning. Presently, however, they were reinforced from above by the king and his party, with the redoubtable queen at their head. Finding Curdie again busy amongst her unfortunate subjects, she rushed at him once more with the rage of despair, and this time gave him a bad bruise on the foot. Then a regular stamping fight got up between them. Curdie, with the point of his hunting knife, keeping her from clasping her mighty arms about him, as he watched his opportunity of getting once more a good stamp at her skin-shod foot. But the queen was more wary, as well as more agile, than hitherto. The rest, meantime, finding their adversary thus matched for the moment, paused in their headlong hurry and turned to the shivering group of women in the corner, as if determined to emulate his father and have a son-woman of some sort to share his future throne. Hairlip rushed at them, caught up Looty, and sped with her to the hole. She gave a great shriek, and Curdie heard her, and saw the plight she was in. Gathering all his strength, he gave the queen a sudden cut across the face with his weapon, came down, and she started back, with all his weight on the proper foot, and sprung to Looty's rescue. The prince had 2 defenseless feet, and on both of them Curdie stamped just as he reached the hole. He dropped his burden and rolled shrieking into the earth. Curdie made one stab at him as he disappeared, caught hold of the senseless Looty, and having dragged her back to the corner, there mounted guard over her, preparing once more to encounter the queen. Her face streaming with blood, and her eyes flashing green lightning through it. She came on with her mouth open and her teeth grinning like a tiger's, followed by the king and her bodyguard of the thickest goblins. But the same moment in rushed the captain and his men, and ran at them, stamping furiously. They dared not encounter such an onset. Away they scurried, the queen foremost. Of course, the right thing would have been to take the king and queen prisoners and hold them hostages for the princess. But they were so anxious to find her that no one thought of detaining them until it was too late. Having thus rescued the servants, they set about searching the house once more. None of them could give the least information concerning the princess. Looty was almost silly with terror, and, although scarcely able to walk, would not leave Curdie's side for a single moment. Again he allowed the others to search the rest of the house, where, except a dismayed goblin lurking here and there, they found no one. While he requested Looty to take him to the princess's room, she was as submissive and obedient as if he had been the king. He found the bedclothes tossed about, and most of them on the floor. while the princess's garments were scattered all over the room, which was in the greatest confusion. It was only too evident that the goblins had been there, and Curdie had no longer any doubt that she had been carried off at the very first of the inroad. With a pang of despair, he saw how wrong they had been in not securing the king and queen and prince. But he determined to find and rescue the princess, as she had found and rescued him, or meet the worst fate to which the goblins could doom him. Chapter 28. Curdie's Guide. Just as the consolation of this resolve dawned upon his mind, and he was turning away for the cellar to follow the goblins into their hole, something touched his hand. It was the slightest touch, and when he looked, he could see nothing. Feeling and peering about in the gray of the dawn, his fingers came upon a tight thread. He looked again, and narrowly, but still could see nothing. It flashed upon him that this must be the princess's thread. Without saying a word, for he knew no one would believe him any more than he had believed the princess, he followed the thread with his finger, contrived to give Luti the slip, and was soon out of the house and on the mountainside, surprised that, if the thread were indeed the grandmother's messenger, it should have led to the princess. And he supposed it must, into the mountain, where she would be certain to meet the goblins rushing back, enraged from their defeat. But he hurried on, in the hope of overtaking her first. When he arrived, however, at the place where the path turned off for the mine, he found that the thread did not turn with it, but went straight up the mountain. Could it be that the thread was leading him home to his mother's cottage? Could the princess be there? He bounded up the mountain like one of its own goats, and before the sun was up, the thread had brought him indeed to his mother's door. There, it vanished from his fingers, and he could not find it, search as he might. The door was on the latch, and he entered. There sat his mother by the fire, and in her arms lay the princess, fast asleep. "Hush, Curdie," said his mother. "Do not wake her. I'm so glad you're come. I thought the cobs must have got you again." With a heart full of delight, Curdie sat down at a corner of the hearth, on a stool opposite his mother's chair, and gazed at the princess, who slept as peacefully as if she had been in her own bed. All at once she opened her eyes and fixed them on him. "Oh, Curdie, you've come," she said, quietly. "I thought you would." Curdie rose and stood before her with downcast eyes. "Irene," he said, "I am very sorry I did not believe you." "Oh, never mind, Curdie," answered the princess. "You couldn't, you know. You do believe me now, don't you?" "I can't help it now. I ought to have helped it before." "Why can't you help it now?" "Because, just as I was going into the mountain to look for you, I got a hold of your thread, and it brought me here." Then you've come from my house, have you? Yes, I have. I didn't know you were there. I've been there 2 or 3 days, I believe. And I never knew it. Then perhaps you can tell me why my grandmother brought me here. I can't think. Something woke me. I didn't know what, but I was frightened. And I felt for the thread, and there it was. I was more frightened still when it brought me out on the mountain, for I thought it was going to take me into it again, and I liked the outside of it best. I supposed you were in trouble again, and I had to get you out, but it brought me here instead, and oh, Gertie, your mother has been so kind to me, just like my own grandmother. Here, Gertie's mother gave the princess a hug, and the princess turned and gave her a sweet smile, and held up her mouth to kiss her. Then you didn't see the cobs? Asked Gertie. No, I haven't been into the mountain, I told you, Gertie. But the cobs have been into your house, all over it, and into your bedroom, making such a row. What did they want there? It was very rude of them. They wanted you, to carry you off into the mountain with them, for a wife, to their prince Harelip. Oh, how dreadful, cried the princess, shuddering. But you needn't be afraid, you know. Your grandmother takes care of you. Ah, you do believe in my grandmother then? I'm so glad. She made me think you would someday. All at once, Gertie remembered his dream and was silent, thinking. But how did you come to be in my house and me not know it? Asked the princess. Then Gertie had to explain everything, how he had watched for her sake, how he had been wounded and shut up by the soldiers, how he had heard the noises and could not rise, and how the beautiful old lady had come to him, and all that followed. Poor Gertie, to lie there hurt and ill, and me never to know it, exclaimed the princess, stroking his rough hand. I would have come and nursed you if they had told me. I didn't see you were lame, said his mother. Am I, mother? Oh, yes, I suppose I ought to be. I declare I've never thought of it since I got up and down amongst the cobs. Let me see the wound, said his mother. He pulled down his stocking, when behold, except a great scar, his leg was perfectly sound. Gertie and his mother gazed in each other's eyes, full of wonder, but Irene called out, I thought so, Gertie. I was sure it wasn't a dream. I was sure my grandmother had been to see you. Don't you smell the roses? It was my grandmother healed your leg and sent you to help me. No, Princess Irene, said Gertie. It wasn't good enough to be allowed to help you. I didn't believe you. Your grandmother took care of you without me. She sent you to help my people anyhow. I wish my King Papa would come. I do want to tell him how good you have been. But, said the mother, we are forgetting how frightened your people must be. You must take the princess home at once, Gertie, or at least go and tell them where she is. Yes, mother. Only I'm dreadfully hungry. Do let me have some breakfast first. They ought to have listened to me, and then they wouldn't have been taken by surprise as they were. That is true, Gertie, but it is not for you to blame them much, you remember? Yes, mother, I do. Only I must really have something to eat. You shall, my boy, as fast as I can get it, said his mother, rising and setting the princess on her chair. But before his breakfast was ready, Curdie jumped up so suddenly as to startle both his companions. "Mother, mother," he cried, "I was forgetting. You must take the princess home yourself. I must go and wake my father." Without a word of explanation, he rushed to the place where his father was sleeping. Having thoroughly roused him with what he had told him, he darted out of the cottage. Chapter 29. Mason Work. He had all at once remembered the resolution of the goblins to carry out their second plan upon the failure of the first. No doubt they were already busy, and the mine was therefore the greatest danger of being flooded and rendered useless, not to speak of the lives of the miners. When he reached the mouth of the mine, after rousing all the miners within reach, he found his father and a good many more just entering. They all hurried to gang by which he had found a way into the Goblin country. There, the foresight of Peter had already collected a great many blocks of stone, with cement ready for building up the weak place, well enough known to the goblins. Although there was not room for more than two to be actually building at once, they managed, by setting all the rest to working and preparing the cement and passing the stones, to finish in the course of a day a huge buttress filling the whole gang and supported everywhere by the live rock. Before the hour when they usually dropped work, they were satisfied the mine was secure. They had heard goblin hammers and pickaxes busy all the time, and at length fancied they heard the sounds of water they had never heard before. But that was otherwise accounted for when they left the mine, for they stepped out into a tremendous storm which was raging all over the mountain. The thunder was bellowing, and the lightning lancing out of a huge black cloud, which lay above it and hung down its edges of thick mist over the sides. The lightning was breaking out of the mountain too, and flashing up into the cloud, for the state of the brooks, now swollen into raging torrents, it was evident that the storm had been storming all day. The wind was blowing as if it would blow him off the mountain, but, anxious about his mother and the princess, Curdie darted up through the thick of the tempest. Even if they had not set out before the storm came on, he did not judge them safe, for in such a storm even their poor little house was in danger. Indeed, he soon found that but for a huge rock against which it was built, and which protected it both from the blasts and the waters, it must have been swept away if it was not blown away. For the two torrents into which this rock parted a rush of water behind it united again in front of the cottage. Two roaring and dangerous streams, which his mother and the princess could not possibly have passed. It was with great difficulty that he forced his way through one of them and up to the door. The moment his hand fell on the latch, through all of the uproar of winds and waters came the joyous cry of the princess. "There's Curdie, Curdie, Curdie!" She was sitting wrapped in blankets on the bed, his mother trying for the 100th time to light the fire, which had been drowned by the rain that came down the chimney. The clay floor was one mass of mud, and the whole place looked wretched. But the faces of the mother and the princess shone as if their troubles only made them the merrier. Curdie burst out laughing at the sight of them. "I never had such fun," said the princess, her eyes twinkling and her pretty teeth shining. "How nice it must be to live in a cottage on the mountain." "It all depends on what kind your inside house is," said the mother. "I know what you mean," said Irene. "That's the kind of thing my grandmother says." By the time Peter returned, the storm was nearly over, but the streams were so fierce and so swollen that it was not only out of the question for the princess to go down the mountain, but most dangerous for Peter, even Curdie, to make the attempt in the gathering darkness. "They will be dreadfully frightened about you," said Peter to the princess, "but we cannot help it. We must wait till the morning." With Curdie's help, the fire was lit at last, and the mother set about making their supper. And after supper, they all told the princess stories till she grew sleepy. Then Curdie's mother laid her in Curdie's bed, which was in a tiny little garret room. As soon as she was in bed, though, through a little window, low down in the roof, she caught sight of her grandmother's lamp shining far away beneath, and she gazed at the beautiful silvery globe until she fell asleep. Chapter 30. The King and the Kiss. The next morning, the sun rose so bright that Irene said the rain had washed his face and let the light out clean. The torrents were still roaring down the side of the mountain, but they were so much smaller as not to be dangerous in the daylight. After an early breakfast, Peter went to his work, and Curdie and his mother set out to take the princess home. They had difficulty in getting her dry across the streams, and Curdie had again and again to carry her, but at last they got safe on the broader part of the road and walked gently down toward the king's house. And what should they see as they turned the last corner but the last of the king's troop riding through the gate? "Oh, Curdie," cried Irene, clapping her hands right joyfully, "my king papa is come." The moment Curdie heard that, he caught her up in his arms and set off at full speed, crying, "Come on, mother dear, the king may break his heart before he knows that she is safe." Irene clung round his neck, and he ran with her like a deer. When he entered the gate into the court, there sat the king on his horse, with all of the people of the house about him, weeping and hanging their heads. The king was not weeping, but his face was white as a dead man's, and he looked as if the life had gone out of him. The men-at-arms he had brought with him sat with horror-stricken faces, but eyes flashing with rage, waiting only for the word of the king to do something. They did not know what, and nobody knew what. The day before, the men-at-arms belonging to the house, as soon as they were satisfied the princess had been carried away, rushed after the goblins into the hole, but found that they had already so skillfully blockaded the narrowest part, not many feet below the cellar, that without miners and their tools they could do nothing. Not one of them knew where the mouth of the mine lay, and some of those who had set out to find it had been overtaken by the storm and had not yet returned. Poor Sir Walter was especially filled with shame, and almost hoped the king would order his head to be cut off, for to think that the sweet little face down amongst the goblins was unendurable. When Curdie ran in at the gate with the princess in his arms, they were all so absorbed in their own misery and awed by the king's presence and grief that no one observed his arrival. He went straight up to the king, where he sat on his horse. "Papa, Papa," the princess cried, stretching out her arms to him. "Here I am." The king started. The color rushed to his face. He gave an inarticulate cry. Curdie held up the princess, and the king bent down and took her from his arms. As he clasped her to his bosom, the big tears went dropping down his cheeks and his beard, and such a shout arose from all the bystanders that the startled horses pranced and capered, and the armor rang and clattered, and the rocks of the mountains echoed back the noises. The princess greeted them all as she nestled herself in her father's chest, and the king did not set her down until she had told them all the story. But she had more to tell about Curdie than about herself, and what she did tell about herself none of them could understand, except the king and Curdie, who stood by the king's knee stroking the neck of the great white horse. And still, as she told what Curdie had done, Sir Walter and the others added to what she told, even Lucy joining in the praises of his courage and energy. Curdie held his peace, looking quietly up at the king's face, and his mother stood on the outskirts of the crowd, listening with delight, for her son's deeds were pleasant in her ears, until the princess caught sight of her. "And there is his mother, King Papa," she said. "See, there. She is such a nice mother, and she has been so kind to me." They all parted asunder, and the king made a sign to her to come forward. She obeyed, and he gave her his hand, but could not speak. "And now, King Papa," the princess went on, "I must tell you another thing. One night long ago, Curdie drove the goblins away and brought Lucy and me safe from the mountain. And I promised him a kiss when we got home, but Lucy wouldn't let me give it to him. I don't want you to scold Lucy, but I want you to tell her that a princess must do as she promises." "Indeed she must, my child, except it be wrong," said the king. "There, give Curdie a kiss." And as he spoke, he held her towards him, and the princess reached down, threw her arms around Curdie's neck, and kissed him on the mouth, saying, "There, Curdie, there's the kiss I promised you." Then they all went into the house, and the cook rushed to the kitchen, and the servants to their work. Lucy dressed Irene in her shiningest clothes, and the king put off his armor, and put on purple and gold, and a messenger was sent for Peter and all the miners, and there was a great and grand feast, which continued long after the princess was put to bed. Chapter 31. The Subterranean Waters. The king's harper, who always formed a part of his escort, was chanting a ballad which he made as he went on playing on his instrument, about the princess and the goblins, and the prowess of Curdie, when all at once he ceased, with his eyes on one of the doors of the hall. Thereupon the eyes of the king and his guests turned thitherward also. The next moment, through the open doorway came the Princess Irene. She went straight up to her father, with her right hand stretched out a little sideways, and her forefinger, as her father and Curdie understood, feeling its way along the invisible thread. The king took her on his knee, and she said in his ear, "King Papa, do you hear that noise?" "I hear nothing," said the king. "Listen," she said, holding up her forefinger. The king listened, and a great stillness fell upon the company. Each man, seeing that the king listened also. And the harper sat with his harp between his arms, and his fingers silent upon the strings. "I do hear a noise," said the king at length. "A noise of a distant thunder. It is coming nearer and nearer. What can it be?" They all heard it now, and each seemed ready to start to his feet as he listened. Yet all sat perfectly still. The noise came rapidly nearer. "What can it be?" said the king again. "I think it must be another storm coming over the mountain," said Sir Walter. Then Curdie, who at the first word of the king had slipped from his seat and laid his ear to the ground, rose up quickly, and approaching the king said, speaking very fast, "Please, your majesty, I think I know what it is. I have no time to explain, for that might make it too late for some of us. Will your majesty give orders that everybody leave the house as quickly as possible and get up to the mountain?" The king, who was the wisest man in the kingdom, knew well there was a time when things must be done, and questions left till afterwards. He had faith in Curdie, and rose instantly, with Irene in his arms. "Every man and woman follow me," he said, and strode out into the darkness. Before he had reached the gate, the noise had grown to a thundering roar, and the ground trembled beneath their feet, and before the last of them had crossed the court, out after them from the great hall door came a huge rush of turbid water, and almost swept them away. But they got safe out of the gate and up the mountain, while the torrent went roaring down the road into the valley beneath. Curdie had left the king and the princess to look after his mother, whom he and his father, one on each side, caught up when the stream overtook them and carried safe and dry. When the king had got out of the way of the water, a little up the mountain, he stood with the princess in his arms, looking back with amazement on the issuing torrent, which glimmered fierce and foamy through the night. There Curdie rejoined them. "Now, Curdie," said the king, "what does it mean? Is this what you expected?" "It is, your majesty," said Curdie, and proceeded to tell him about the second scheme of the goblins who, fancying the miners of more importance to the upper world than they were, had resolved, if they should fail in carrying out the king's daughter, to flood the mine and drown the miners. Then he explained what the miners had done to prevent it. The goblins had, in pursuance of their design, let loose all the underground reservoirs and streams, expecting the water to run down into the mine. which was lower than their part of the mountain. For they had, as they supposed, not knowing of the solid wall close behind, broken a passage through into it. But the readiest outlets of the water could find had turned out to be the tunnel they had made to the king's house, the possibility of which catastrophe had not occurred to the young miner until he had laid his ear to the floor of the hall. What was then to be done? The house appeared in danger of falling, and every moment the torrent was increasing. "We must set out at once," said the king. "But how to get at the horses?" "Shall I see if we can manage that?" said Curdie. "Do," said the king. Curdie gathered the men-at-arms and took them over the garden wall, and so to the stables. They found their horses in terror. The water was rising fast around them, and it was quite time they were got out. But there was no way to get them out, except by riding them through the stream, which was now pouring from the lower windows as well as the door. As one horse was quite enough for any man to manage through such a torrent, Curdie got the king's white charger and, leading the way, brought them all in safety to the rising ground. "Look, look, Curdie," cried Irene, the moment that, having dismounted, he led the horse up to the king. Curdie did look, and saw high in the air, somewhere about the top of the king's house, a great globe of light shining like the purest silver. "Oh," he cried in some consternation, "that's your grandmother's lamp. We must get her out. I will go and find her. The house may fall, you know." "My grandmother is in no danger," said Irene, smiling. "Here, Curdie, take the princess while I get on my horse," said the king. Curdie took the princess again, and both turned their eyes to the globe of light. The same moment there shot from it a white bird, which, descending with outstretched wings, made one circle round the king and Curdie and the princess, and then glided up again. The light and the pigeon vanished together. "Now, Curdie," said the princess, as he lifted her to her father's arms, "you see my grandmother knows all about it, and isn't frightened. I believe she could walk through that water, and it wouldn't wet her a bit." "But, my child," said the king, "you will be cold if you haven't something more on. Run, Curdie, my boy, and fetch anything you can lay your hands on to keep the princess warm. We have a long ride before us." Curdie was gone in a moment, and soon returned with a great rich fur and the news that dead goblins were tossing about in the current through the house. They had been caught in their own snare. Instead of the mine, they flooded their own country, whence they were now swept up and drowned. Irene shuddered, but the king held her close to his chest. Then he turned to Sir Walter and said, "Bring Curdie's father and mother here." "I wish," said the king, when they stood before him, "to take your son with me. He shall enter my bodyguard at once, and wait further promotion." Peter and his wife overcame, only murmured, almost inaudible thanks, but Curdie spoke aloud. "Please, your majesty," he said, "I cannot leave my father and mother." "That's right, Curdie," cried the princess. "I wouldn't if I was you." The king looked at the princess, and then gave Curdie a glow of satisfaction on his countenance. "I too think you are right, Curdie," he said, "and I'll not ask you again." but I shall have a chance of doing something for you for some time. Your Majesty has already allowed me to serve you, said Curdie. But Curdie, said his mother, why shouldn't you go with the king? We can get on very well without you. But I can't get on very well without you, said Curdie. The king is very kind, but I could not be half the use to him that I am to you. Please, your Majesty, if you wouldn't mind me giving my mother a red petticoat, I should have got her one long ago but for the goblins. As soon as we get home, said the king, Irene and I will search out the warmest one to be found and send it by one of the gentlemen. Yes, that we will, Curdie, said the princess, and next summer we'll come back and see you wear it. Curdie's mother, she added. Shan't we, King Papa? Yes, my love, I hope so, said the king. Then, turning to the miners, he said, Will you do the best you can for my servants tonight? I hope they will be able to return to the house tomorrow. The miners, with one voice, promised their hospitality. Then the king commanded his servants to mind whatever Curdie should say to them. And after shaking hands with him and his father and mother, the king and the princess and all their company rode away down the side of the new stream, which had already devoured half the road, into the starry night. Chapter 32, the last chapter. All the rest went up the mountain and separated in groups to the homes of the miners. Curdie and his father and mother took Luti with them, and the whole way a light, of which all but Luti understood the origin, shone upon their path. But when they looked round, they could see nothing of the silvery globe. For days and days the water continued to rush from the doors and windows of the king's house, and a few goblin bodies were swept out into the road. Curdie saw that something must be done. He spoke to his father and the rest of the miners, and they at once proceeded to make another outlet for the waters. By setting all hands to the work, tunneling here and building there, they soon succeeded, and having also made a little tunnel to drain the water away from under the king's house, they were soon able to get into the wine cellar, where they found a multitude of dead goblins. Among the rest, the queen, with the skin shoe gone, and the stone one fast to her ankle, for the water had swept away the barricade which prevented the men-at-arms from following the goblins, and had greatly widened the passage. They built it up securely, and then went back to their labors in the mine. A good many of the goblins, with their creatures, escaped from the inundation out upon the mountain, but most of them soon left that part of the country, and most of those who remained grew milder in character, and indeed became very much like the Scotch brownies. Their skulls became softer as well as their hearts, and their feet grew harder, and by degrees they became friendly with the inhabitants of the mountain, and even with the miners. But the latter were merciless to any of the cob's creatures that came in their way, until at length they all but disappeared. The rest of the history of the princess and Curdie must be kept for another time. The end.